Ok, bueno, perfecto. Pues bueno, muy buenos días a todos. La verdad es que bienvenidos. Realmente me da muchísimo gusto tenerlos a todos ustedes aquí. Mira, la verdad es que no esperábamos esto que pasara así tan... Para empezar, que sucediera y luego de repente tan rápido, por tan poco tiempo. Pero la verdad es que con la ayuda de muchas personas logramos tener este evento. Bienvenidos aquí al Erlang Factory Lite, el primero aquí en México. Obviamente también muchas gracias a todos nuestros sponsors. En este caso a Starbeast, ¿no? que están por allá. Y que nos ayudaron muchísimo justamente con toda la logística, muchas cuestiones justamente de la organización, de ver los proveedores, etcétera, etcétera. La verdad es que muchísimas gracias. Por supuesto también a Erlang Solutions. Erlang Solutions también estuvo ayudando muchísimo también con el material, ayudándonos a entender, bueno, a mí enseñándome el tema de poder hacer un evento, que no tenía ni la más remota idea de cómo hacer uno. Entonces, la verdad es que recibí mucho de apoyo de allá. Y también igual, otros sponsors que tuvimos, Making Devs, que también estuvo ayudándonos también con su patrocinio. Easy Broker también, que tenemos por allá. Ahí está, ahí luego levantando la mano. También igual muchas gracias también por el apoyo. Y a Software Guru, que también estuvo ayudándonos con el tema de estar difundiendo el evento. Y que también la verdad es que creo que fue de las cosas que ayudó bastante para que pues en realidad pudiera los boletos se vendieron en 2 semanas, que es lo que estábamos comentando. Yo estaba preocupado porque dije que no se iban a vender y de repente en 2 semanas se acabaron y de repente resulta ser que ahora tengo una larga lista de gente que me estaba pidiendo poder venir al evento y que desafortunadamente pues tengo que decir que no. Entonces, pero bueno, ya tenemos planeado para el siguiente año. Nada más que me reponga de nada más rápidamente unos datos que de los cuales estoy muy contento también. El grupo, la verdad es que está creciendo bastante, el interés en Elixir, el interés en Erlang. El grupo lo iniciamos justamente hace 3 meses aquí en la Ciudad de México, y al día de hoy tenemos ya casi 500 personas en la lista, ¿no? En 3 meses nada más. La verdad es que está creciendo mucho. En los meetups que tenemos aquí, de hecho, principalmente aquí también igual en Central, estamos alrededor de unas 40, 50 personas asistiendo frecuentemente, ¿no? A pesar de que los torturo desde las 9 hasta las 2 de la tarde, están aquí y no se van. Y además también Agustín, Agustín está por allá, que la verdad es que también ha hecho un muy buen trabajo de estar haciendo los talleres. Y también ahí tiene a gente que también los tiene ahí presionando para que aprendan Erlang y aprendan Elixir. Eduardo, que también está por acá, que es el que lleva a la comunidad también allá de Monterrey, que también estamos haciendo lo posible porque crezca, pero Eduardo la verdad es que también ayuda mucho justamente a tratar de que eso suceda. La agenda que tenemos el día de hoy, cerramos ahorita ya rápido esta bienvenida, para inmediatamente darle paso ahí a José Valim, que nos hizo el honor de venir, que darnos una plática secreta. No nos quiso decir el título de la plática, entonces va a ser sorpresa. Inmediatamente tenemos un coffee break, ¿sí? Trajimos ahí pan de muerto, y ya estamos realmente no estamos estrictamente en temporada, pero bueno, ya. Entonces, para que después ahorita que hagamos el break puedan ahí pasar y tomar una rebanada, igual café y todo. Y luego después continuamos con charlas que tenemos de 40 minutos. Vamos a empezar con Mario Chávez, nos va a hablar justamente de Ruby y Elixir. Después voy a volver a pasar yo para platicarles, voy a explicarles un poco sobre el tema de la máquina virtual. Y después tenemos a Agustín dándonos una plática sobre pruebas. Y vamos a tener el break a la 1 de la tarde. Entonces va a ser la parte de abajo, vamos a tener ahí la comida. Y tenemos 1 hora para después. Tenemos aquí a Hernán, aquí. Nos hizo el favor de darse una pequeña vuelta, está bien aquí cerquita de Argentina, Entonces, viene a platicarnos también un poco justamente del Gen Server. Y pasamos después con Misael para el tema de estrategias de supervisión de procesos. Tenemos otro break. Luego después tenemos a Erika Macho con OTP. Y vamos a cerrar con Ricardo, que nos viene visitando de Chihuahua, para hablarnos justamente de Raspberry, ¿no? Él anda para allá. Y bueno, entonces estamos cerrando aproximadamente a las 5:30, ¿sí? Todo ya las pláticas, y vamos a tener de aquí a las 7 para poder, tenemos ahí unas cuantas cervezas. Entonces, no se preocupen, va a haber bastante para todos. Y hay sorpresa también con respecto a la cerveza que vamos a tener. A las 7, lo que sí es que a las 7, digo, por favor, a las 7 en punto sí tenemos que prácticamente todos estar ya fuera del lugar. Entonces, más o menos vamos a estar recogiendo y todo como unos 15 minutos antes de las 7, ¿sí? Porque sí necesitamos, porque lo que pasa es que también se tienen que quedar las personas aquí para hacer la limpieza, varias cosas. Entonces tenemos que ser bastante puntuales para que podamos entonces, pero por eso justamente al final, después de aquí, vamos a tener para quien guste acompañarnos, vamos a tener una fiesta posterior. Nos vamos a ir a Coyoacán, está allá un lugar reservado que es el Corazón de Maguey, y ya ahí nos vamos a mover para allá todos los que gusten, y ahí va a ser hasta que nos corran del lugar también. Tópicamente nos corren como a las 3 de la mañana, ¿no? Entonces tenemos todo ese espacio. ¿Listo? Entonces, yo voy a estar en Twitter, digo, para que quieren ahí mandar fotos, mensajes, reclamos, etcétera. ¿Sí? Tenemos el Erlang Factory allá en San Francisco, que va a ser ahora en el 2006, va a ser ahorita del 10 y el 11 de marzo. También ahí también tienen específicamente cursos o capacitación, también igual antes del evento y posterior al evento, ¿sí? Entonces igual también si gustan ir. Y pues nuevamente muchísimas gracias a todos. Bienvenidos, ojalá que de verdad las pláticas sean de su agrado, ¿sí? Y pues bueno, ahora sí, Valim, por favor.
Alright, good morning everyone. I want to first start by thanking the organizers and the sponsors for making the first Erlang Factory happen here in Mexico. And before I started, so who here is using Elixir? Be it for personal projects or in production, or just play with it a little bit. Okay, great, awesome. So this talk is about Elixir. It's kind of like trying to give an overview where Elixir is right now and the directions we want to go in the future. Okay, so what I'll try to do is try to include a little bit of what is happening with Elixir, even from the most basic features to the most advanced ones, and discuss about that. Okay, so a year ago, okay, we were releasing Elixir 1.0. The release actually happened in September 2014, and it was really, really exciting. And one of the most exciting things that we had happening was that by the time Elixir 1.0 came out, we had more than 180 contributors. So 180 different developers, they contributed to the language, and that's just code, right? I'm not talking about all the other contributors, like people organizing meetups, telling about Elixir to their coworkers and so on. So it was really fantastic. And by the time Elixir 1.0 came out, we already had 3 books announced by 3 major publishing companies. And we also already had our first Elixir conference that happened in Austin in July last year. And what is really exciting about this is that um, one of the goals for Elixir as a programming language is that we wanted Elixir to be extensible. I like to say that computer science today is such a wide field, right? That it's impossible for it to have a programming language that is going to work across all those fields really, really well. So one of the language design goals was that the language is extensible, so you can take it to other domains and extend it and bring it, make it productive in all the different kind of domains you're working on. And that's exactly what we saw happening. So one of the things that we hear a lot is folks using Elixir for the web infrastructure. So anything from running on the TCP socket or UDP socket, you need like a protocol, and then you need to build something using binary parsing. Elixir is going to be great at that. But also developers building web applications, API backends, up to distributed systems. Okay, there is one very exciting talk we had at Erlang. The video is already online, you can check later, at Erlang Factory San Francisco this year, about folks using Elixir for building a distributed game platform, which is really, really cool. And we also had Elixir conference happening a week ago, and we had a bunch of great talks about folks using Elixir to build embedded systems. So you can get Elixir with Linux and everything into 20 megabytes, put into an embedded system, and upgrade that thing live. So there's folks are actually building embedded hardware and software that ships with Elixir, and they are selling that. So a bunch of interesting stuff happening in the embedded area. We also hear folks using Elixir in financial and video platforms, for example, on areas that are supposed to be very data intensive, so they have data coming all the time, and they're using Elixir to process this data. And also a couple interesting talks from people building graphical user interfaces with Elixir. So this is really rewarding, okay? And that's kind of what happened and what we saw happening in the last year. And if you want to hear a little bit more about those use cases, my company Platform Attack, we did a series very obviously named called Companies Using Elixir in Production, where you can find some of those use cases and people talking about that. And it's great if you want to share with your friends or coworkers, if you want to try to convince them to use Elixir and so on. Okay, so cool. So that's what was happening for this last time, the last year. And right now, we're no longer, however, in Elixir 1.0. We are with Elixir 1.1. It was released kind of 10 days ago. And Elixir 1.1, so it was released last month, okay? And it's really exciting to say that from the last year up to now, Elixir 1.1, we gained more than 100 contributors, right? So when Elixir 1.0 came out, we had kind of 180 contributors, and now with Elixir 1.1, there are almost 300 contributors that have contributed to the language altogether. So thanks for everyone that is helping with code and making the language to continue to grow and move forward. The community is also growing really, really fast. So we just reached 1,000 packages on HexPM, and we have more than 6 million downloads altogether. Okay, and what I want to do for this talk is to talk a little bit about what is exactly with Elixir 1.1 and what we can expect as developers. Okay, so the best source to know what we have in Elixir 1.1 is, if you're not familiar yet, you can go to the Elixir website. We have the news there, or you can go to our changelog, and that kind of lists everything that happened throughout this 1 year until we get Elixir 1.1. It's very well detailed, okay? And as you can expect with Elixir being a functional programming language, we have a lot more functions, right, with Elixir 1.1. So this is almost all the functions that we added. Don't worry about the names here, right? Just to give an idea of what we added to Elixir 1.1. It's almost all functions. I had to remove 2 because the names were too big and they were messing my layout, so they're out. But they are almost all here. Okay, and just to give an idea what we can expect. So for example, one of the modules that we use with Elixir a lot is the enum module, right? That we use to work with collections, lists, and so on. And it got a bunch of convenience functions. So for example, can you in the back see what is here, or kind of? Kind of. Okay. Yeah. So I'll go slow and try to give a little bit more details. So so we got a bunch of functions in the enum module. So one of those functions is the enum dedupe. That so we had enum unique that you would give a list and it would return a list with only the unique items, removing the duplicates. And what dedupe does is that it removes the duplicates only if they appear in a row. So here I have a list with 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, and it's going to return 1, 2, and 1. We now finally have a function to take a random item from a collection. So here I'm saying enum random passing a range, and it's going to return me a random number, or I can take even like 3 random elements from the collection. Okay, so just very small functions that are convenient, and when you need them, you're going to find them in the standard library now. Another improvement that we have to Elixir are new functions to the string module, and this one is really cool. It's gyro distance, and this function can be used to calculate the distance between 2 strings. And we use this, for example, in mix now. So if you are using mix, which is our build tool, and you by accident type like mix hello, and you meant to type mix help, now you're going to say, hey, I can see that you're trying to run this thing called hello, but it doesn't really exist. Did you mean help instead? Maybe that's what you meant. So we are going to use this function a lot more in Elixir to help you exactly when typos happen. We can use that for variables, for example, right? You are writing your code and then you do a typo in a variable name. Then you say, hey, you typed this variable, maybe you wanted this one instead. So it's a very handy function that we expect to use more and more. And some other nice features that we got with Elixir 1.1, they came to the task module. So the task module, it already exists in Elixir 1.0, in the old Elixir versions. And one of the nice things we can do with it is the async await pattern. Okay, so who here is familiar with the async await pattern in Elixir? We use task async await. Cool. So what is task async await? So as we know in Elixir, all the code, it runs inside processes, right? So we have our code and everything's happening inside processes. And sometimes, for example, a very simple use case, we kind of want to execute some task, execute something particular at the same time. So imagine that you're building a web application and you need to access 3 different APIs at the same time to get information. Let's say, so for example, I heard a case of people building, they are like a sport application where you can go and visit your soccer team, and every time access that page, you need to go to Twitter to get the latest things that they were publishing Twitter. You need to go to their Flickr page. So what you can do when you have tasks in Elixir is that there is a web request and you say, oh, now I want to create a task. Okay, that's the async await pattern. I want to create a task that's going to concurrently access a Twitter, and then you create another task that is going to access Flickr, and then you create another task that's going to access something else, and they are all running at the same time. And then when you are ready to get the results back, you call await. That's why it's the async await pattern. You're running something on the side, and then when you did whatever you wanted to do, meanwhile you call await, and you're going to wait until you have a response back. So here what we are doing is that, for example, just an example, I'm saying task.async, and that's creating a task, okay, that's executing the code that you give to the task in the given function. And then at some point when you want to know the result, you're going to call await and you're going to give it a timeout, which is the time you want to wait for that thing to finish. And this is how it works with Elixir. The issue with this is that task await, it's kind of, it's very binary. Or it's going to give the result, or you're going to wait the timeout, which in this case 5 seconds, and then it's going to exit, it's going to error with a timeout. Okay? But sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want to say, hey, did you by any chance finish? Right? And then if depending if the task finished or not, we do something else. So, and that's exactly what we added to Elixir 1.1. So here at the top, what I'm doing is that we have now something, instead of calling await, you can say task.yield, and that's a way for you to say, hey, instead of waiting and then erroring if something doesn't happen, with yield you can say, I want to wait 5 seconds. And then if it works, good, you give me the result. And then if it doesn't work, just let me know, and then I can choose what I want to do next. So what we can do now is that we can do things like, hey, did you finish by any chance? And then you wait a little bit, and then, oh, I didn't finish. And then you can try to wait a little bit more. And then at some point you say, okay, I've waited enough. I don't want to wait anymore. And then you can explicitly shut down. So now, working with tasks in Elixir 1.1 is getting nicer and nicer because we are adding a couple more convenience functions. Okay? And those are some of the functions that we added to Elixir. As I showed, the list is quite comprehensive. But Elixir, when you install it, it's not only Elixir itself. It comes with some other things built in. And one of those things is Mix, which is the build tool, right? So when you're learning Elixir, one of the things that you end up eventually doing is using like Mix New or Mix Phoenix.new to create a new project. And that's all powered by Mix, our build tool. And Mix got a bunch of nice improvements. For example, now we have a Mix profile.fprof task that you can use to profile your code. So for example, here I have an example of calling like Mix profile.fprof, and then you can give it a script, and that's going to go run that script and measure how much time it's being spent in each function, and so on. Okay, so you cannot see here, but what you're saying is that here's saying all the functions that were called, how many times each function was called, how much time it was spent on that function, including the things that that function in particular called, because you have a function, that function calls other function, right? So this is going to include all the time, and this is going to include the time in that function specifically, not including the children. So this is great, right? So we want to see why things are not working as fast as we expect them to be. That task is going to help you. And that's one of the nice improvements we got with Mix, but we got a bunch of other nice ones. So one of those is that now in Elixir 1.1, you're going to see faster compilation times. And that's because every time we compile our code with Elixir, what we did is that we kind of generated a graph. So if you have a file A, and that file A called file B, we would track that. So every time you change B, you need to recompile A, right? Recompile A, because we need to track what changes, and depending on what changes, we recompile. And with Elixir 0.0, we did not make a difference between runtime dependencies and compile time dependencies. Okay, which meant that if you changed something, it was very likely that it would propagate through the whole graph and you end up compile a bunch of stuff. Especially if you're using Phoenix, right? So in Phoenix, for example, you have the router, which is when you have a request, the router sends you to this controller or to this controller or to this controller. So the router kind of like access everything, but it's only at runtime. So what would happen in old versions of Elixir is that if you change something in the router or something that the router depended on, it would cause your whole Phoenix project to recompile. But now with this feature we have in Elixir 1.1, you're going to get much faster compilation times because we just track the things that are important. Okay, so this is a really nice improvement, and having faster compilation times, it's always welcome. Some other things related to compilation in Elixir is that when you are inside the interactive Elixir, which is the Elixir terminal, the Elixir shell, a lot of people would change something in their project, and then they wanted to recompile their project, and there was no way. So they would go to the mailing list and say, hey, I just changed something in my project, and I want to reload my project from the terminal, and not need to close the terminal and start a new one. Now with Elixir 1.1 we have a small function called recompile that's going to recompile our project, and we had to add it because it was like almost every month there was someone sending an email, hey, can we have that? So now I finally have that. And probably the first difference you're going to notice when you go to Elixir 1.1 is that if you have a Git dependency in your project, right? So we have like hex packages, Git dependencies, and so on. We are now changed how the Git dependencies work to use HTTPS instead of Git, because HTTPS is faster and safer. And those are all features that code features that happen to the language. But as I said, the most important language features, they are often not related to code. And we saw a lot of exciting things happening in the community. So the first one was the addition of a code of conduct. So now if you go to the Elixir repository, we have a code of conduct there, and we added this to help guarantee a safe environment, a safe and welcoming environment to everyone. So that was a very nice contribution from Flavia. And we also get a very brand new documentation. So this is if you haven't checked it out, go to Elixir website, click on the docs, and you can see our new documentation. We have the most beautiful, clean, and readable documentation that I have ever seen, and that's for Elixir. And it's not for Elixir only. You can see that Phoenix and Acto and all other projects, they're already using this documentation, and you can use it in your projects too. You just need to add the documentation to your project as a dependency, and it's going to work.